Again, welcome. We're excited that you're here. You should have just received a notification on your screen that this meeting is being recorded. We're doing that so that we can share it via our website after the fact for anyone who is not able to be with us live in person. So if you would prefer, it looks like everybody does have their video off, but you can keep your video off throughout the duration of the presentation if you'd like. And please also make sure you remain on mute whenever you're not speaking so that we don't have any background noise happening. So we are going to start this meeting by turning it over to Councilwoman Eleanor Brown, who we're so excited to have with us tonight to say a few words of welcome to us all. So Councilwoman Brown, please.
Thank you, Carolyn, and welcome to the team, Carolyn. I should say, so happy to have you joining this very important work. We are so excited about our leadership as a city, both our leadership at the council level and at the staff level. We are very excited about our resiliency work. And I just want to welcome to the meeting and hello, whoever's joining us just then. It's such an important aspect of our life here in Hampton, living with the water. And so I see lots of neighbors and friends joining in, and also lots of professionals. So that's very exciting to have the professional community also joining us to follow along and be engaged with these very exciting real projects that you're going to hear about today. We've been talking a lot about living with the water, but it's now time to really learn more about what we're planning. We have, as you may know, if you've participated already in our Resilient Hampton project, have had outreach to the community, and we've had lots of wonderful input and participation and have just had tremendous community support and engagement, which means so much to us because our goal is to make Hampton the most livable waterfront city in the United States. And we are very excited to have your insights, both as citizens and as professionals working in this area. We launched our efforts to holistically address sea level rise and climate change when we began conferring with the Dutch. You all may know that we engaged with our Dutch dialogues beginning in 2015. And I can tell you, I personally have participated in some of the Dutch dialogues, and it's so exciting to learn how the Dutch are living with water. Our focus has been, how can we use natural approaches to adapt and live with the water? And we've learned a lot from the Dutch and really appreciate that partnership. We've had a lot of local and state partners as well as national partners who have partnered with us and helped us to really come up with some exciting, ambitious plans. We are so grateful for our association with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Last year, in fact, we're celebrating today, the 1-year anniversary of the closing on our environmental impact bonds, which have been a unique financing tool for doing some of this work. And I'm very grateful for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation's involvement and really their confidence in our desire to really get this right. The 3 projects you're going to hear about tonight are the culmination of all that planning. These are projects that are pilots that we can replicate. We are very excited to get them out of the ground and show and demonstrate physically what we are thinking of doing to really be able to harness these natural forces and to live with them. So I really appreciate the approach that we've taken in this effort. We have really wanted to focus on equity in this effort and engagement. As I said, public participation has been crucial. Public involvement, understanding what challenges folks are living with in their day-to-day lives is so important and key to our mission. So I really appreciate everyone joining in tonight. Thank you for your interest in what we are doing to preserve our environment and our beautiful waterfront spaces and our waterfront habitat. It's such a wonderful asset for Hampton and one that I personally am deeply committed to, and I know all of you are as well. So I will turn it back over to Carolyn to give us all of the details of this exciting work. And thank you all so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman Brown. That was a wonderful overview of some of the work we've done to date. It's very exciting to hear it all summarized in that way. So let's go ahead and get into a couple of introductions for who is going to be presenting tonight. So my name is Carolyn Heaps. I'm the Resiliency Officer for the City of Hampton, and I coordinate our city's Resilient Hampton initiative. Also here and presenting this evening is Scott Smith. He is a senior civil engineer in the Stormwater Division of our Public Works Department, and he is managing these projects on behalf of the city. We have Anna Hammond and Kayshayla Rogers from our Housing and Neighborhood Services Division, and Allison Jakura, who's a senior city planner. The three of them will be providing some technical assistance and support throughout the course of the meeting tonight. We are also very excited and pleased to have consultants from two consultants we've been working with, Moffitt and Nickel and Wagner and Ball. They've both been involved with the Resilient Hampton efforts over the past several years from the conceptual design of these projects. And so we're happy to have Brad Ellis and Rami Diaz from Moffitt and Nickel and Wagner and Ball respectively here to support with the presentation this evening. For tonight's agenda, we're going to spend the first half of the meeting doing an overview of Resilient Hampton, as well as the Newmarket Creek Water Plan. And then we will dive into the details on the three projects you're all here to hear about. So Big Bethel Blueway, North Armistead Avenue, and Lake Hampton. And we're going to spend the second half of the meeting with at least 30 minutes reserved for comments, questions, and answers. So we do hope that you will stick around to participate in that part of the meeting tonight. Again, we do want you to know that this meeting is being recorded so that we can share it via our website, and you may wish to turn off your video. We also ask that you please remain muted during the presentation and whenever you're not speaking during the comments, questions, and answer session. We ask that everyone be respectful of other participants throughout the meeting. We will use a couple of polls. We'll launch one of those soon, and we're gonna just use those to gather some more information about who's in the room. Please know that your responses to those are anonymous. You can submit questions via the chat at any time. If we can address them during the presentation, we will. Otherwise, we will certainly come back to them at the end. And if you did submit questions via the Q&A in advance, we will try and address those during the presentation. And if not, we will either get in touch with you directly or try to address those at the end of the session. During the comments, questions, and answers session, we're going to use the raise hand feature in Zoom to acknowledge participants to unmute themselves and share your comments. So please do wait until you are acknowledged during that session in order to unmute and begin speaking. And we're going to do our best to acknowledge you in the order that you raise your hands. Lastly, for the benefit of the group, we're going to try to avoid spending too much time on questions regarding impacts to specific properties. If you do have a question about how a project will impact your specific property, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. You can share your question via the chat feature and we'll get in touch with you via the email you used to register, or you can contact us at the contact information shown here on the screen and we will be in touch with you directly. For those who are new to Zoom or haven't used it in a while, this screen just shows some information on how you do some of those functions I was speaking about. So mute, unmute in the bottom left-hand corner. You can access a chat window in the center bottom of your screen, and then the bottom right hand you can use to exit the meeting if you need to. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and launch one of those polls that I was talking about. So Allison is going to get those going for us. And please take a moment and take a look at these, share your responses. You can use the map on the screen to help you in your answers. So we're asking, firstly, do you live in one of the three project areas? And then secondly, have you been impacted by flooding? And we'll wait for these responses to come in and then share the results. Again, these are anonymous, so don't worry about that. Great. Let's see here. I think we can go ahead and share the results. Great. So we can see we have some folks here who do live near Big Bethel Blueway, and a lot of people that don't live near the projects but are interested, which is wonderful. This project will certainly impact people that live outside of these areas, especially all three of them, but especially the road raising, for example. And we can see that 4 people have been specifically impacted by flooding. So that's good to know. Thank you for taking a moment to do that. So let's go ahead and get into the overview of the Resilient Hampton initiative. The purpose of doing this is to give you some context for our team and what it is we're working on. You can see on the screen here our definition of resilience that we've established. And you can read here that really our emphasis is on finding and enhancing our strengths. So we define resilience as the bolstering of a community's inherent strengths in order to alleviate chronic stresses and enable recovery from extreme events and shocks in ways that make the community even stronger than before. So as a coastal city, we know that we experience water as a major asset, but also as a challenge, particularly in the face of changing environmental events. I think most residents in Hampton are aware and familiar with flooding in its various forms, from storm surge to high tide driven flooding or rainfall driven flooding, or some combination of the 3. We know that climate change is exacerbating and changing how these impacts are experienced at the local level. And the Resilient Hampton initiative was really designed to address that challenge holistically, working with staff across the city, all of our departments, to collaboratively address these challenges. We have 8 goals that guide our work that you can see listed here on the screen. These are informed by values and guiding principles, all of which were outlined in our Living with Water Plan, which was the framework for resilience that was established by the city. Crucial to our approach is that we are creating multiple benefits while mitigating flooding, that we work with partners, and that we work at multiple scales. So ultimately, we're seeking to create a movement for resilience that isn't just occurring by the city, but really by all parts of the community. So that movement will guide us to a future in which we find solutions that allow us to live and thrive with water, embracing all of the assets that we have as a coastal community. So from kayaking for recreation to aquaculture research to support our industry, and from conservation to support the ability of our natural environments to thrive. Councilwoman Brown talked a little bit about this history, but this work of Resilient Hampton has really been in motion since 2015 when we participated in a workshop called the Dutch Dialogues and made a commitment to addressing the challenge of climate change and sea level rise in our coastal community. From there, we established that citywide framework I was mentioning and committed to developing watershed level plans for each area of the city. And the first of those watershed level plans was for Newmarket Creek that was completed in 2020, and that plan outlined the projects we're here to talk about tonight. Moving forward, we are looking to replicate that plan in downtown Phoebus and Buckrow, and ultimately identify and implement similar projects for resilience across the city. So the Newmarket Creek Water Plan was established to accomplish 3 main things. Firstly, it looks at the various current and forecasted conditions for the watershed to understand the challenges and opportunities that exist. We worked collaboratively with the community to establish a vision for the future of the watershed and what a resilient future would look like living with water. And then lastly, we conceptualized specific projects, 3 of which we're here to talk about tonight. And those all are aiming to slow, store, redirect, and adapt to water to enhance resilience. So at this point, I am going to turn it over to Rami, who is going to speak more about the water plan before we get into the specifics of the projects.
Thanks, Carolyn, and good evening, everyone. Wagner and Ball, we've been working in Hampton since the Dutch Dialogues, and Dutch Dialogues is actually something that Wagner and Ball started with the Dutch Embassy in New Orleans after Katrina. And we've been working with many cities to do similar projects. And a lot of work has come out of those studies. And this is one of the great examples of a project that really lives with nature and lives with water. And so one of the things that Wagner and Ball does in our projects is we look to the past to try to see a path to the future. And so we started with an early image here of Newmarket Creek in 1937, and you can see this is before much of the development patterns that you see now. The creek used to be much more serpentine and had room to move within the sort of wetland floodplain that it had originally. You can also see here around the Big Bethel Blueway that used to be a swampy area that was sort of a depression and low-lying and drained to the creek. And over time, the creek has been channelized. We've built closer to the edges of the creek, and much of the kind of open land has been turned into asphalt and houses and such. And so we now have to manage that drainage much more carefully in the future. The next slide shows that floodplain, the 100-year floodplain and the 500-year floodplain. And as you all know, this is with climate change and rising sea and sinking land, this is subject to change and great risk. And as you can see here, the purple line is the sort of the Big Bethel Blueway watershed, the Lake Hampton watershed, and then the larger Newmarket Creek watershed is outlined in kind of a solid purple. And that's all the water that flows by gravity to the Newmarket Creek. Water comes from the high ground, right? It goes by gravity, it falls on the land and it runs off to the lower areas and then needs to be drained. And one of the things we looked at on the next slide in the Dutch dialogues and are continuing now and through the Newmarket Creek Water Plan is really three different ways to manage water. One is dealing with runoff from the high ground to the low ground by slowing it and storing it and trying to get it into the ground and manage it where it falls, and improving drainage while at the same time finding space for water storage, recognizing that there's this tidal influence as the Chesapeake sea levels raise during hurricanes or just everyday tides or nor'easters. That influences how the drainage works in the Newmarket Creek watershed. And then finally, are there opportunities in the future to try to manage that risk, whether by raising roads or finding opportunities to deal with that kind of tidal influence. So those are some of the things we looked at with the Newmarket Creek Water Plan, which you can find online at the city's website, the Resilient Hampton website. The next slide is about the community meetings that we had for the Newmarket Creek Plan. We had several workshops. The one at the left there, you can see us working around the table with some of our Dutch colleagues and Moffat-Nichol colleagues, as well as members of the community, students from Hampton University, where we got really messy and drew a lot and put everything we could on paper. And then we presented it to the community where we helped select some of the projects to move forward with. The next slide. I'm sorry, I missed something I meant to say there. Some of the things that we heard in that meeting from the community was that there was a lot of support for these pilot projects, and that using green infrastructure instead of hard solutions is really understood well by the community, and something that the city should really be trying to do. And that all projects, as we presented, should have multiple benefits. That it shouldn't just be a drainage project. It should be a living with water project that has benefits with it, like paths or green space or things that increase value of the community. And then planting trees and using native plants was something that the community really appreciated and wanted to see more of. There was some concern about mosquitoes and tidal flooding and those things that need to be further studied. But we're pretty confident with green infrastructure around the country. We've been doing this, that mosquitoes are it's something that we can manage. It's not it can be designed for. But then also considering maintenance and monitoring long-term, and that's very important for the city to keep maintaining these projects. And then finally, identifying lots of opportunities within the public and private sphere to do these types of projects. So on the next slide, these were some of the big concepts which we're going to mention a few times tonight, which is really starting on the high ground to find ways to slow and store water, get it into the ground. A combination of private and public properties, whether it's encouraging homeowners to store water on their property or working with commercial sites to do something with their parking lots and roofs. Over time, finding ways to incentivize that, creating replicable projects that can be repeated around the city. And then finally, this idea that came out of the workshops, which was to connect all of this water management work to a loop trail that would provide an alternative route, a safe route for pedestrians and bicyclists to circumnavigate the community. And the next slide shows that loop, which is dotted, but that each of these sort of drainage features that you have in the city now have a right of way that has space for this path. And so we'll talk about that more with the Big Bethel Blueway. But this leverages investments that are already being made in the city. So you've got the Water Walk Trail and that great boardwalk already that connects the Coliseum to Air Power Park. And then the upcoming Birthplace of America Trail that is a state level project that connects Jamestown and Yorktown and Williamsburg to Fort Monroe. So the next slide, and we're going to start talking about the Big Bethel Blueway. So it's located, show the next slide. It's located in that big circle there. It's, as we discussed, this watershed. All of the water in that kind of outlined area drains to this canal. It's a channel that carries water from the high ground to Newmarket Creek by gravity. The neighborhood drains into it. And on the next slide is an aerial view that looks at how the Big Bethel Blueway is parallel to Big Bethel Road. It runs through the neighborhood behind houses. It connects to the former Francis Mallory School site where you've got some ball fields and is a well-used site. There's lots of kind of neighborhood streets that cross it that we're reconnecting with this shared use path that we're proposing. And then in some places, you'll see marks there for weirs, which we'll talk about more, but those are ways of holding water back so that the water doesn't rush as quickly down to Newmarket Creek. We find a way to store that water within the Blueway to reduce flooding downstream. In the next slide, we're going to take a walk down the Big Bethel Blueway. This is starting up at Big Bethel Road, and you can see one of the first outfalls where the water is coming from underneath Big Bethel. There's a lot of outfalls along the way that need some repair work, especially where the water comes from the neighborhood into the canal. The next slide is a little further down, closer to, I'm not sure if it's advancing for everyone. Yeah, so this is down by the Francis Mallory School site. You can see how wide that path is that currently exists. It's really just a maintenance path. And then the canal on the left side. The next slide is a little further down, south of Lassiter. This zone of the trail it has some more space constraints, and the trail will actually switch to both sides back and forth, and there's some boardwalks that will be envisioned for that zone. Next slide. And I'm going to turn this over to Scott.
Thank you, Rami. As you can see from this slide, we're going to talk about some of the benefits that we're gaining from this project. And as we had indicated, that the Big Bethel Blueway project is in that area of flowing and storing water. So in this project, we're going to create 8.7 acre feet of water storage. And an acre foot, just for some context, is roughly, if you think about a football field, 1 foot deep, filled 1 foot deep with water, that's about an acre foot of water. So this project is going to generate 8.7 acre feet of water storage. The multi-use path that we're proposing will be about 6,000 lineal feet, so just over a mile long. And then we're going to create habitat and improve water quality by creating wetlands and using native plants to enhance the canal experience. So with this, I'm going to turn it over to Brad, who will explain how we're going to slow and store the water.
Thank you, Scott. As Scott said, we're looking to store, that 8 foot deep football field area of water. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we plan to make that work along this entire Blueway. So what we're seeing now is on this slide is a typical section. This one happens to be up near Three Chop Road between Mercury Boulevard and Three Chop. If you're starting on the right-hand side, you can see this parcel boundary. Essentially what we've got is, residential homes on one side, and then moving left across the slide, a fairly flat area, as Rami talked about, is basically a maintenance area, then a slope down to the canal itself, which even in this photo has a little bit of water flowing across it in there. And we've highlighted this dashed line showing what the current existing ground looks like. So on the next slide, what we're indicating is, the final product here. Again, starting on the right-hand side, we've got the parcel boundary, maintaining, existing fences and trees wherever possible. And we've got the multi-use trail that will extend the full length down and indicated in yellow there. And then the real piece of how we store this water is, if you can see the difference between the white existing grade and then the proposed grade. So we're proposing to lay back that slope of this canal, make a cut out of there to allow some additional storage space for water. And then to help stabilize that towards the bottom of that slope, we're going to have a little more planting areas with some native plants to help stabilize the slope and also help with nutrient treatment of the water. So what we're seeing here, water, you see the blue in the actual canal itself coming from Three Chop Road. That's your kind of day-to-day water you'd see. No storm, say there's always a little bit of water in this canal. So the next slide shows what would happen. Let's say we had a pretty good rainstorm come in, so water starts to fill up into this canal, into our storage area, indicated, on the right-hand side of the actual channel between the existing and proposed grade lines. That fills up, but what it won't do is then flood back onto the Three Chop or the path itself. So this is a typical section, the general plan going all the way down the length of the Blueway. So how are we going to hold that water? On the next slide, we show the general engineering practice of a control weir, which is, you think of a weir, it's really the part, just think of it as a part of a dam where the water flows over. So, looking at the larger rendering, you see those small blue waters. So you got your day-to-day flow is maintained, and then large storm events, the water can pond up behind that weir, and extreme events will flow right over it without flooding the neighboring streets and areas. And then, after a couple of days, it's back to its normal dry scenario. And just to kind of show really what we're looking at, in the circle on the right-hand side is the weir that controls Coliseum Lake. So, that's a fairly famous weir right here in Hampton. Ours in this project will be a lot smaller, but it's the same principle of keeping the water in the lake to the elevation we'd like it to stay at, and then letting it go over when it needs to, and also go through when it needs to. So on the next picture, next slide here, takes a look at the entire Blueway going. If you look at the map on the right, we've got, all the way on the north end at Big Bethel, all the way down to Newmarket Creek. We've indicated the three weirs locations that are planned as part of this project. One at Mercury Boulevard, one at Sunnyside, right near the former Mallory School, and then the last at Lassiter Drive. So on the left-hand side of the slide, if you were to imagine yourself walking right down the middle of the canal, this is what we're calling the existing condition dry, which would be, again, day-to-day, hasn't rained in a while. There's a small amount of water moving down the canal. You can see all the streets going through existing pipes. On the top, that's how the canal looks today. Well, on the bottom, after the project is implemented, during the non-rain event times when it hasn't rained in a while, it'll look essentially the same, except you'll have the three weirs and then some additional plantings at the bottom. So then let's take a look at what it would happen if it, were to rain in this same scenario. So again, at the top, we have the Blueway or the canal as it is today, where there's really no control and all the water just collects, flows down fast, and you have a high elevation of water in Newmarket Creek. So there's really no control to where that water goes, or excuse me, how it's held back. And then the bottom condition is after the project's constructed, the same type of rainstorm, we've got our 3 control levels that just help, as Rami said, hold it back. What we're trying to do is detain some of that water so that we don't get the massive flows all at one time. And then also having that wider section that we looked at a few slides ago helps just also get all the water off your streets to help reduce general local flooding at the same time, while not increasing the flooding down at the creek. And just for some context on these weirs, all 3 of them would be about, if at full height, you'd be about 5 feet of water. And then again, as a day or 2 passes, this would drain back to what we had at the dry condition, where the water's just right at the bottom of the channel. So that's kind of a general plan of how the system works. And I'm going to turn it back to Rami to talk about some other enhancements down the Blueway.
Thanks, Brad. So this is a view again of the Blueway space as it exists by the Mallory School at Sunnyside Drive. And you can see that maintenance path, and once again, that there's some water in this, in the bottom of the canal. And in the next slide, we show a rendering of what it will look like with the weir structure, which we're actually celebrating, and it's going to be a cool thing. It's not just a pure engineering structure. We're hoping it's going to be an interesting design. We're working with Moffett Nickel on that. And then we're combining it with a boardwalk, a place where you can overlook the water, sit and rest, a little extra space there for some benches, plant some trees, and then have some educational signage so that you can learn about what's happening in the creek and why the water is doing what it's doing. And this would be marked as well at the intersection with a light, some sort of light, as well as some signage, and then some safety enhancements at the crossing. This shared use path is intended to be just a dawn to dusk amenity. So the lighting will only be at the intersection to mark that that location. And the next slide is about the planting strategy. And the landscape design strategy for both this project and Lake Hampton is to use native species, things that grow really well in the historic landscape, and things that are lower maintenance for the city, so that they take care of themselves as much as possible. So they're not having to be mowed all the time. And so you'll have some more natural looking grasses and plants down at the bottom of the canal than what you see today. And those will help with stabilizing it, as Brad mentioned. It also helps to get the water into the ground, and also helps more with the uptake of pollution and other things that run off the streets into the Big Bethel Blueway. So we're going to switch over now to the next project area, which is the North Armistead and Lake Hampton projects. And these are really combined. We see them as sort of one big project, even though they're sort of being designed. They have some different intents, right? One is more of a traffic kind of road project, and then the other is more of a stormwater sort of landscape project. But you can see where they are there at near the intersection of LaSalle and Armistead, next to the Home Depot, really, and the Freeman Drive, in the Coliseum central zone of the city. Next slide. I'm not sure if it's stuck. Here we go. So this is an aerial view that we took looking down Armistead. You can see the Newmarket Creek in the background there, and the wide kind of wetland floodplain of Newmarket Creek in that area. And then Lake Hampton to the right, the Home Depot beyond, and some of the context. And you have a wonderful tree canopy in this neighborhood, which is really, really great. Next slide. The next slide should be showing the view from, if you were over the top of the gas station or the Home Depot near Freeman Drive. So you can see Freeman Drive there at the top of the picture, Lake Hampton to the left, and the Newmarket Creek wetlands to the right. This is the very low spot that floods regularly. My understanding is that the elevation of the roadway there is about 3 feet, maybe 3.5 feet relative to sea level. And it's subject to frequent flooding. We are looking to leverage the investments that have made on Freeman Drive, as well as connect to the water walk, which is running through this zone. The next slide is a view from the west, looking towards Air Power Park and Home Depot. Here we go. As you can see, this wonderful meander of the Newmarket Creek, which currently you can't really get to unless you really bushwhack through those bushes there. But you can see the wetland zone and the lake and the Home Depot at the right. In the middle of the lake, there is a peninsula that's a remnant of when they dug the lake. It was a borrow pit for the construction of I-64. And that peninsula we will be making into an island, which we'll talk about later, but that's one of the habitat enhancements for Lake Hampton. The next slide. I believe we turn this over to Scott.
Yeah, this
last one. Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Rami. So this slide shows the roadways at flood risk. The areas in red are the roads that are subject to frequent flooding. You can see it's a condition that plagues the city. And then within the inset, you see with the blue X's indicate frequently flooded roads that we've had reports on. And within the circle, it shows the proposed project area of North Armistead with the Home Depot on the right and then going up toward Finley Street. And as we go to the next slide, we can see, so as I indicated, that this project is slightly different than the Big Bethel Blueway, being that it's a road project and that we're going to elevate the road, as Rami had indicated, that down by the Home Depot, the low point on the road is at about 3.5 feet above sea level. So we're in that area, we're going to raise the road approximately 4 feet to bring it up to 7.5 feet above sea level. And that elevation will taper off as we head up toward Finley Street. So we'll tie back in at Finley Street. So the height of the road will decrease as we go away from the Home Depot. And as we indicated before, we're adding water storage. In this case, we're adding 18 acre feet of water. So for this project, think of 18 football fields, 1 foot deep. We're adding 1.25 miles of sidewalk and trails that will provide connections to the water walk trail and improve bike and ped safety. And we're creating habitat and protecting habitat by creating 1/2 an acre of new wetlands and 0.2 acres of bird habitat. And I'll turn it over to Brad to explain how these features will be incorporated into the project.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Again, just want to start here, looking at how the design of all this work will help with the flooding and help create a nicer space for the city. Looking at the aerial, you see Hampton Coliseums in the background, and then way in the back, you got Big Bethel Blueway we were just talking about, way upstream in Newmarket Creek. A water walk trail here in the foreground, I-64 on the left. So the takeaway here is the way Newmarket Creek wraps around Armistead and Lake Hampton, the highlighted area you see on in the foreground, the front part of it, we've got the creek, and then it wraps around Home Depot, and then we've got the same creek on the backside of Lake Hampton. So we're seeing the creek and these two areas right together in the same area of potential hazards from flooding. So the next slide indicates exactly that, how Armistead Road can be attacked from tidal flooding. You know, if there's a large hurricane, nor'easter, a storm, the tide rises, or just general tides. And then Lake Hampton, from the top side of the page, you can get creek flooding from just large rainfall events that will bring a lot of additional rain down the creek. So the way we're going to remedy that is on the next slide. We're looking at, like Scott was indicating, to raise Armistead Avenue to protect on the tidal side, and then to increase the elevation on the south side of Lake Hampton, which is up at towards the top of the page of the ground there, and also to disconnect the lake from tidal flows, tidal influence itself with a new outfall. So those two projects, which are the Lake Hampton project and the Armistead Avenue road raising project, are how we're going to help reduce the flooding in this area. So to get into it a little bit on the next slide, again, this is just an aerial of Armistead Avenue. The camera's right about at Freeman Avenue. So here's the existing condition. And then the next slide shows, you know, what would be the final condition of after the Armistead project. So the first thing you may notice is the road looks pretty much the same, which is exactly the case. You know, if you use the road, it's really post construction project. It will still look pretty much the same amount of lanes, same travel. But what we'll have is a higher roadway at Finley Street there, you know, where the A inset is, the A circle on the right. You see the road comes up a little bit. And then as you move closer to the Home Depot at B, you've got the road's a little bit higher. C, it's a little bit higher still. And then as Scott indicated, down near the Home Depot itself, you get to about 4 feet higher than it is today. And that, you know, completes the road elevation increase, which will help protect against that tidal flooding. And then the shared use path on the left-hand side of the roadway, that will be an amenity that's added to connect down to Lake Hampton and the Water Walk Trail. And then we've got a similar median in between the lanes of grassed area with trees. But in this case, we're going to also utilize that median to, again, help store some water and, you know, collect that water in the median before it moves down to Lake Hampton and out to the creek. So that's an overview of the Armistead improvements. Looking at the area as a whole, again, with an aerial view here, you can see the Armistead part we were just talking about, from Finley Street down to the Newmarket Creek Bridge past the Home Depot. And then right into Lake Hampton, starting with those median swales we were talking about, where that water can be collected and then transferred into some additional storage areas shown in that dark green, kind of in the middle. We're indicating them as detention basins. Get some more storage there, and then that water ultimately will drain down to Lake Hampton, which has been disconnected from the tide. So that's where the additional flow, or excuse me, the storage that Scott mentioned, 18 acre feet is quite a bit, but Lake Hampton's a fairly large area of a lake. So there's good potential for additional storage there in the storm events. There's other amenities, including the trail and some boardwalks, and turn it back to Rami to go over those additional amenities for these two projects.
Great, thanks, Brad. So this drawing here is a section profile cut. It's labeled A on the map to the right. It's cutting through Lake Hampton on the right, and on the left is Newmarket Creek. In the middle of the drawing, you can see the berm where we're raising the landscape a couple of feet and tying into the high ground on either side, back at Freeman Drive and then at the Home Depot site. And that will house the trail, the shared use path that will go navigate its way through the trees with the lake on one side and Newmarket Creek on the other. We're also creating a wetland shelf on the Lake Hampton side that creates a shallow, wider area to increase storage capacity for the lake when it fills up with stormwater, but it also creates habitat for fish and other species that will enhance the ecology of the area. And then finally, the Newmarket Creek connection there, you'll be able to walk out to the water's edge a little bit more easily with cleaning up that landscape, so you can enjoy that connection. At the bottom, you can see some examples. Some are from the area. The Water Walk Trail is the closest precedent that we have. It's already under construction, has already been built. So we'll have a similar character to that. And then some of the wetland shelves that have been created along Newmarket Creek as well. The next slide is a section cut labeled B on that plan to the north side there of the lake. And as soon as it changes, here we go. So this is a section from Armistead over to the lake. You can see how high Armistead is there. That kind of light color is showing the amount of fill. And what we're going to do is take the water from that higher ground, as well as the water from the neighborhood as it runs downhill. And it's going to be slowed and filtered through the detention basins that Brad was talking about, and held there for a while until it slowly drains into the lake. Once again, these detention basins will be planted with native species and kind of have a wetland character. And so they'll also create habitat. And then the trails will have trees along them and create shade. And the Norfolk Botanical Garden has some great examples of that we're looking to for inspiration. And the next slide describes some of the really exciting amenities. We're going to continue the language of the Water Walk Trail boardwalks into the lake. So there will be a crescent boardwalk that goes out into the water, so you can get really close to it and overlook it. We're looking at the recently built boardwalks at Mount Trashmore that have fishing facilities associated with them and benches and other things. And then also along the Freeman Drive project, there's been some very nice benches and bike racks installed, and we're going to continue that language around the lake. But really, we're creating a loop that allows you to circumnavigate this lake, and it turns it from a borrow pit, which some people didn't even know existed in the city, and turning it into a real asset and amenity, a lake that you can enjoy and recreate around. And then finally, the Rookery Island. I'm really excited about this. By disconnecting that peninsula, it allows the birds to have a safe habitat where land mammals can't attack them as they're roosting and hatching eggs. And there's lots of great precedents around the country for this, especially, and because this is such an important flyway for migrating birds, it should increase the birds living in Lake Hampton. So the next slide shows a view of the existing lake edge. So we flew our drone out over the water at about eye level. And so this is what it looks like. And in the future, on the next slide, we rendered what the boardwalk will look like, connecting back to the water walk with the benches and the overlooks and places for people to, just recreate and enjoy that beautiful lake. And then you can see on the right, the increased fish habitat there with the wetland shelf that provides, you'll have a really wonderful connection there to the water on both sides of this boardwalk. Next,
Okay.
Carolyn.
So, thank you. So we're nearing the end of our presentation. We're gonna jump into Q&A just in a second. But before we finish talking about the projects, we just wanted to share some information on the timelines for construction. So for Big Bethel, we are looking at finishing designs on the project this winter with construction beginning late spring at the earliest. For Lake Hampton and North Armistead Ave, we are going to be coordinating the construction of these two projects, given, as you've seen, how closely integrated they are. And again, project designs will be final sometime this winter, and then construction will begin next summer on these projects at the earliest. We will be sharing more information and details with the public via some of the same methods we have been using as details on construction become more final. Lastly, just in terms of funding and financing for the projects, each of these projects is financed by the city's $12 million environmental impact bond that Councilwoman Brown mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. This unique financing mechanism actually required that the city commit to accomplishing specific and measurable outcomes to benefit the community and the environment. So our main goal was to add about 26.5 acre feet of stormwater storage, or 8.6 million gallons. And you've seen us talk through exactly how we're doing that and what that means through each of these three projects. We'll be closely monitoring and reporting on the accomplishment of that goal. And the bond is being repaid with proceeds from the city's stormwater fee. We are also seeking and have received some additional grant funding from the state in order to further support with the project implementation. So let's do comments, questions, and answers. Before we do launch into that, we do want to put another poll up for you to respond to. So you should have just seen this pop up on your screen. Again, we have two questions. Firstly, we want to know how you heard about our meeting tonight so that we can constantly improve how we're getting the word out on these projects and other types of outreach that we're doing. And then secondly, we'd love to know whether you have used the water walk trail in the past. So if you could take just a moment to respond to those, and we will share the results. Again, these are anonymous. And while you all are working on that, I will advance to the next slide with a friendly reminder to please enter your questions in the chat or use the raise hand function to communicate. And when you do, we will acknowledge you to unmute and to speak. So Anna is going to be facilitating that session, and here are kind of the instructions. You can access the raise hand function by going to the bottom of your screen and clicking the reactions button, and from there you can click raise hand, or you can click the chat button and enter your question by typing in the chat feature. Okay, so let's go ahead and share the poll results. Thank you for taking the time to answer those. Looks like a little over half of the people that responded to have used the water walk trail, which is great. It's great to hear. Hopefully more of you will use it now. It is a great spot. And there's a Winter Wonderland event going on right now, so you can check that out. All right. So please, let's go ahead and have questions and answers. I am going to stop sharing my screen for a moment while we do this, and I'll return for this final slide, but please do ask away in the chat or use the raise your hand function.
We have all these folks joining us this evening and no one has questions. All right, I will start actually because I do have a question that came in via chat. And it is, at one point, I remember hearing the idea of making the walkway lower so that it would flood as well, creating even more storage for water. Why did the plan not include this?
Great, that's a great question. That's true. That was originally part of the plan. So I think I'll turn this over to Scott. Do you want to start with the answer and then pass it along as you need to?
Yeah, we had evaluated it, and because of the additional excavation that would be required, it would just be too expensive to do it, it wouldn't be cost beneficial for the additional storage, the cost we were getting from it, the cost we would incur, just it didn't make sense to do. Had we been filling to make the trail, and this is on the Blueway, that if it was filling to make the trail, it would have made sense. But here the existing trail was already at that elevation. So just excavating it started creating more issues with the adjoining properties, creating slopes next to the adjoining properties. So therefore, we had evaluated it and it just didn't seem to make sense in this case.
Thanks, Scott. Who else has questions? And remember, you can just drop them in the chat if you're comfortable. If you would like to raise your hand and ask, you may. You're also, I invite you to send it directly to me if you don't want to post it to the entire group. Right, so I see we have a message that says, great presentation. Big Bethel project looks to be a less costly, possibly easier project. Couldn't Big Bethel be done while you're working on funding for the road projects, etc., for Lake Hampton and North Armistead?
Yes, so I would say that we're at this point, we're not really waiting on funding to come through to implement these projects so much as just trying to wrap up the designs. So we are very actively working on finishing those designs, as I mentioned, and then we'll be putting these projects out to bid for construction and then moving forward. So Big Bethel is the first project that we are moving forward for construction. As I mentioned, that'll be in spring of next year, and then Lake Hampton and North Armistead beginning a little bit later than that. But yes, I would say that one is not holding back the other at this point. Scott, do you have anything to add to that?
No, you're correct that, that they're moving together in tandem, that we're on similar tracks for both projects, and actually Lake Hampton will probably be coming out about the same time as Big Bethel. So
yeah, but I think that the point that Big Bethel, and one thing we tried to highlight is that these drainage canals, the existing canals as they exist right now, there are multiple of them. And this project was chosen in part because it is replicable. And so we would look to learn from the success of the Big Bethel Blueway and replicate that in the other drainage canals that exist throughout this area of the city.
We have a question from Mr. Michon.
Yes. I have is there concerns with the construction of Armistead occurring at the time that we're diverting traffic away from the Mallory and Settlers Landing on ramps, increasing more traffic in the Armistead area? With the timing of this being the same time, how's that work out?
That's a great question. I will turn this over to Scott and Brad to answer.
yeah, so coordination with VDOT is ongoing in Public Works. We're well aware of the VDOT projects on 64, and that is being coordinated with those projects. So the North Armistead project will have a slightly longer start date than Lake Hampton, just because of some of the complexities with that are involved with rerouting traffic, taking into account the other projects that are going on in the area.
All right, we have another question that came in, and I believe that this one is referring directly to the Big Bethel Blueway. During construction of each project, if there is a hurricane or nor'easter, can we expect flooding until completed?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think one thing that we do want to make clear is that during extreme events, when we will see a lot of flooding and, for example, if we had another Hurricane Isabel come through, these projects are not going to solve all of the flooding that we would see. We can't fix every flooding event that is going to happen in the city. As a coastal community, it's just a reality of where we live on the coast. I will say that they will certainly help with the flooding especially during just normal storm events that are not extreme events, like a hurricane or a nor'easter. But particularly with the North Armistead Road raising the road, and that'll really help with some of the storm surge impacts that we might see during a less extreme storm event, and certainly will alleviate all of the tidal nuisance flooding that we see now.
And Carolyn, for the and just if the concern was more for the Big Bethel Blueway, again, because the existing drainage system is in place, and that we'd be constructing weirs out there, there will be contingencies for storms built into the construction plan. So we're not expecting any additional flooding waiting for the project to be completed.
Mhm.
All right. Anyone else have any questions? Oh, here we go.
So Anna, this is Councilwoman Brown, and I'm trying to raise my hand. I'm not sure I'm doing that correctly. Hopefully I am. Good. Well, I certainly don't want to forward any questions, but I do want to just share with the staff and our technical support and our citizens that it certainly is very exciting to see the details of this effort come to life. And I'm especially appreciative of the combination of the engineering solutions along with the recreation aspects and the preservation of habitat as well. The fact that we are able to not only accomplish the engineering and controlling of the water, but living with it and enjoying living with it and using these existing areas to create more opportunities for citizens to get outdoors, for us to be able to enjoy our natural resources. I think it makes this such a win-win-win, and I'm very grateful for your efforts, one and all. So I just wanted to endorse those efforts and say thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, we're very excited about the projects. I'm excited to be sharing the information about them, the details, like you say, with the public.
All right. I see no more hands, and I don't see any additional questions in chat.
Okay. Well, if there are not any other questions now, please do know that if something's on your mind that you're hesitating to ask, please do not hesitate to get in touch with us. You can either contact us at the information here at the bottom of the screen, or you can come to one of our upcoming drop-in hours session. We have 3 more coming up, a couple next week, and then one on Friday, December 16th. Those are at the West Hampton Community Center. And a couple of members of staff will be at each of those drop-in hours to answer any questions you have. We can get into the details of your specific property or any, in the weeds as much as you want about the project. So we look forward, we hope to see some of you there. And we also ask that you please share this information with any of your neighbors, anyone else you think might be interested in knowing about these projects. We're trying hard to reach as many folks especially that live in proximity to these projects as we can. So we appreciate you all being here tonight and hope you will help us spread the word. So that will wrap us all up for tonight. Thank you again for joining us. Really glad to be sharing this information with the public, and appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to be here. All right, goodbye everyone.